Hey, beloved. So I've been thinking about Job. We talk about his suffering, his restoration. Today, I want to talk about the people around him. We talk a lot about what Job lost. We talk about how faithful he was. We talk about how God restored him in the end. But I'm inviting you to spend time and for us to talk about the damage done in the middle by the people closest to him. Job's friends weren't strangers. They were they knew who he was before everything fell apart. They knew his character, his integrity, his generosity, his faithfulness. Some of them may have even benefited from his success, his stability, his reputation, his life before the loss. And yet, when his world collapsed, instead of staying present with him, they started explaining him away, meaning they minimized his lived experience. They reinterpreted his pain through their theology. They treated his suffering as evidence of failure, not necessarily because Job was wrong. We can see that or we read that. But could it be his suffering disrupted what they believed about God, about life, about safety? If someone like Job could suffer like that, then maybe obedience wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't, being obedient isn't safe. Maybe righteousness doesn't protect us from loss. Maybe God wasn't as predictable as we thought. And rather than expanding their understanding of God, we may not fully know, but they shrank Job. They talked at him. They theologized over him. They tried to rush him into repentance instead of staying with him in grief. What's really or rarely acknowledged in this, Job was changing in the middle. He was asking deeper questions. He was refusing shallow answers. He was growing in discernment and honesty. And the people around him couldn't recognize the man he was becoming. Only the version of him that made sense to them before the loss. So they discouraged him, they downplayed his reality, they reduced his pain to a problem that needed fixing. They judged him, and God noticed. We see that God doesn't rebuke Job entirely for questioning him. God didn't want to strain the relationship God was developing with Job. But we also find that God, he checks Job's friends because they spoke about God without speaking truthfully about what was happening to Job. And there's something sobering about that. Sometimes the people who knew you before have the hardest time honoring who you're becoming. Sometimes the ones closest to you can sit with the middle of your story, they can't sit with the middle of your story. It doesn't mean they're evil, but presence costs more than explanation. If you are familiar with the Job story or not, I hope that this reflection resonates with you. If you find yourself in the middle of something and the people around you cannot meet you where you are, there are resources out there. There is someone that you can talk to. And also want to remind you that Be With Beloved exists for that middle, the middle of something you're currently in, the middle of something that came back around, or the middle of something you never really had space to deal with. I'm here to say you don't have to deal with it alone. This is a space where you don't have to rush to an ending, where you don't have to explain yourself, where your lived experience isn't minimized or theologized. So if you want to share your middle, raw, unfiltered, the way it is, you're invited. Your middle might help someone else exhale, and realize they're not alone. Until next time, stay beloved.